Welcome to a new episode of the Tolkien Experience podcast. I'm Sara Brown.
I'm Luke Shelton.
And I'm Sara Westvick.
Each episode we share with you an interview of a Tolkien scholar or fan. Hello everybody,
That's
and
right.
welcome
In these
to the
interviews,
latest
one of
episode
us
of the
asks our
Tolkien
guest
Experience
to respond to
podcast.
6
And
questions
today
that help us learn about their personal
that
Tolkien
our
experience.
guest is my very
All
good
of this
friend,
is made possible
Aurélie
by our
Brémont,
supporters on
known to
Patreon,
those of us who
so
know
we
her
want to thank
best
them
as
and encourage you
Lady.
to check out the community at
welcome, Lady. It's really lovely to have you here.
patreon.com/Tolkien-experience.
We are
Thank
so
you for
excited to
having
share
me.
this
It's a
podcast
pleasure.
with you.
Now,
So
let me tell
without
you a
any
little
more
bit about
delay,
Lady
let me
before we go
introduce
any
our
further.
guest. Translator by day, scholar by night, or vice versa, depending on the deadlines, Dr. Aurélie Brémont completed her PhD in English Medieval Studies on Tolkien and the Celtic Heritage in 2009 in La Sorbonne. Since then, she's taken part in events on both sides of the channel, with the Tolkien Society seminars in Leeds and Birmingham, and the Leeds International Medieval Congress, various conventions and conferences in France. In 2016, though, she had the opportunity to translate Tom Shippey's Tolkien Author of the Century into French, which received a special award at the Festival for Fantasy Literature Imaginale in 2017. And I'm sure that we're going to be talking a little bit about that as we go. But first question for you, Aurélie. How were you first introduced to Tolkien's work?
In a very, very natural way. I was maybe 8 or something, and I picked up a book at the local library which had some dwarves on the covers. They were tumbling on top of each other, and so I read The Hobbit as part of a, children pickup at the library. And back then, I remember my elder brother had already read The Lord of the Rings and talked quite a lot about it. And I read in the foreword that The Lord of the Rings was mentioned. So I told my brother, I say, I get this book from the library. It's really cool. But they say it's linked to that other book you know and you love. And he said, oh, yeah, that's the story. So how is it when he finds the ring? I said, well, he finds it, and that's all. I said, oh, okay, disappointing, but I guess that's fine. And then a couple of years later, I went on to read The Lord of the Rings and then the Silmarillion. And back then I read everything in French, of course. And when I went to university and translation school, I wanted to read in English as much as I could to, familiarize myself and get better in English reading and writing. And so I started to tell people, please buy me books in English. And so for Christmas, I got the entire Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, and Silmarillion in English, and I dived in. And it was a revelation in 2 ways. The first one was that I knew I had made the right choices in studies because the original version was so different from the translation I had read in French that it made me want to be a translator even more, to, think, okay, I'm lucky I can read in English, but what about those who can't? And they have to know that some books are that good in the original version, and I want to try and help with that. And the second revelation was, what is that book? What is that thing, that door into this other world, and how did one guy build all that? Why did he do it? How did he do it? And I started to want to research Tolkien as well, to understand what was so special about that book. So that was back in 1996 or 7. And well, I've been pretty true to these 2 revelations ever since. And I'm still trying to help people who can't read in English, and still trying to find out what's so special about that book.
Yes, yeah. I mean, two great things to focus on. I want to focus on the first element first, because you are a translator by trade. And
Yes.
you read The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, etc., first in the French, and then you read it in the original English. And you said that there are differences
Yes.
between the two. So the sort of differences, can you remember any of those differences? Is it just in like the descriptions, or is it in the ways in which things happen? Or what are those differences that you remember?
Well, the first one and the biggest one was that the characters did not quite have the same names in both books. Meaning that we are talking about the original translation. Now, there have been new translations done of both The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. But back then, so the original translation of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, in The Hobbit, Bilbo is called Bilbo Baggins, right? As in English. But in The Lord of the Rings, for some reasons, all the names have been Frenchified, meaning that Bilbo is no longer Bilbo, is Bilbon, because that sounds like on and en are supposedly typical in French. So he's Bilbon, and he's no longer Baggins, he's named Sake, which is sort of a translation, since you have bag in Baggins and sac in French is the translation for bag. And so it was quite weird to see the same character, Bilbo, changing name in between the two books in themselves. So that was already something. And it was a number of small things. I mean, I know now, and I knew even then, that translating all the different identities of English that Tolkien puts into The Lord of the Rings, the differences between the Hobbit speech, the Elven speech, the speech of Rohan, the speech of Gondor, that would be difficult in French, but that was completely absent anyway. There were no marked differences between all the different groups and identities of modern English, and there were a number of tiny things that the French translation had the story right. The story was fantastic, but you lost a lot in terms of the broader landscape, the idea that there was a world out there, that there was more depth, there were many layers. A lot of that was lost in that translation. So that was quite at once frustrating and exhilarating to see what had been done, and quite shocking as well, honestly.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting you're talking about the way in which that first French translation actually changed the names, because Tolkien actually wrote on nomenclature, and he made his feelings quite clear on what should and should not be translated, didn't he?
Yes. It's always complicated as a translator. When you have an opinion of the author, it can be a lot of help, but it can also be very complicated, because I'm French, I translate into French, and I translate into France, so to speak, meaning that translating into my own language means adapting as much as I can and as much as the work allows into a culture. The idea when you're a translator, or at least the way I have been taught and the way I work, is trying to have almost the same reactions and feelings in the French reader as an English reader has when reading the original text. Of course, sometimes it cannot be possible, because you are speaking about certain places, you're speaking about maybe certain time of histories that are typical of one culture or the other. But in as much as it is possible, you need to adapt. And there are things that the author can say, I want or I would like, and it's not always possible as much as you might like it. And you also have to keep in mind that the translation that was done in French, if memory serves, was done during the 60s and early 70s, I think. And back then, there was very little to go on in terms of document about Middle-earth, about Tolkien's writings, about all this. Very little was available to the French translators back then. So they did what they could, but the result is weird, to say the least. It is incoherent in between the two books, and that might be the one thing that you can't really excuse, because both translations were signed by the same guy. It didn't work alone. They were a team, but they were both signed, supposedly done by. It was the same name, so it made no sense to have two different ideologies of translation put into two works that were of the same author and about the same subjects and about the same characters.
Interesting stuff. So you say there's some more modern translations into French. Have you read any of those newer translations?
No, I haven't. I have read extracts of them because I had to, because when I was translating Tom Shippey's book back in 2016, there were quotes, of course, and I was also working with the same team as the one who's doing the translation. So I had to include some of the quote. I had to include the quotes from the newer translation into my own work. I haven't read the translations for several reasons. The first one being, well, I don't read Tolkien in French anymore. I mean, I just don't. And it would really be weird for me to do so. And also it's, how can I say? Translating is really hard. And there are a lot of factors to consider, many of which are not necessarily known to the public or to other translators that are not in the project. And I know that if I were to read, I mean, from what I know of those books, I don't agree with many things that are in them. But that's quite normal, because translation is quite subjective as well. I mean, two people or even the same person 10 years apart will not translate the same text the same way. There are several theories of translation, certain things that we are taught to do or not do depending on where we were taught. And there are also a lot of contingencies that you are not necessarily aware of in terms of copyrights, like what did the new translation, what could it take from the previous one? Or did it have to respect certain copyrights? And so there were some names and words and turns of phrase that could not be reused because they belong to the former copyrights and things like that. So I know that from what I have read, I am also critical of the new translation. And it's a question I'm often asked, of course, and I don't want to get into that because I have a lot of friendship and respect for the guy who did the translation. It's a humongous work. I mean, it's really gigantic, and I don't want to be critical of him. In my opinion, because I don't know how he worked. I don't know what he had to take into account. I don't know when I see the contingencies I had to take into account for my own translation of Shippey's work, there are things that you would not think about. And so it's very difficult to be both a translator and a scholar on Tolkien and to have an opinion on, it wouldn't be fair somehow. So I don't want to get into that. I try to stay away because I feel it wouldn't really be fair for me to do that.
That's fair enough. No problem at all. So you translated Tom Shippey's work, which also sounds like a humongous job to do, but I'm sure really interesting. Is there a particular thing about that work that you did that I'm really proud of that particular thing about that?
Well, that was a couple of years ago already. So now, overall, I am quite happy of the work I did on that book, because I also have a medievalist background, and so I was able to bring that into play, meaning that I was not only a translator for that job, I was also a medievalist scholar, and with a good knowledge of course, I'm not going to compare myself to Tom Shippey, but a teeny tiny common knowledge between him and me, and so that really helped understanding. I mean, if I had no knowledge of medieval English literature or medieval English linguistics, I would have lost much more hair than I already did on that translation. So yeah, it was really nice, because it's not an opportunity that I often have to gather all my skills into one work, both Tolkien and Middle Ages and translation. That was really, it was tough, but that was really, really nice.
Wonderful. So if you had the opportunity, is there another text to do with Tolkien that you would love to have a go at translating?
I would love to translate anything by Verlyn Flieger, because she was one of the first scholars to dive into Celtic culture and mythology regarding Tolkien. And of course, I would love to translate anything by Dimitri Fimi as well, because then again, this idea of being able to translate things that I really have knowledge about, that I feel I really have all the qualifications to be translating, to really know what I'm talking about, know what I'm writing about, and know what I'm translating. So, well.
Well, that would be amazing, I'm sure.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I know I put you on the spot with some of those questions, so let's come back to your
that's fine.
with Tolkien.
Yes.
Do you have, in all your readings of Tolkien's writing, do you have a favourite part or a favourite moment in one of the novels, or is there something that this is my favourite bit?
I do love the less well-known poetry, like the stuff I've had to study for my thesis, poems like the Lay of Autru and Itrun, which is now more famous than it was 10 years ago, but also the Imram, the rewriting of Brandon's Voyage. Mm-hmm. All those less famous poems that draw on Celtic literature and imagery. There is I really love the Lay of Autru and Itrun, because there is a very sad beauty about it, and a charm that you do not find often in Tolkien. But beyond that, well, I guess the reader in me will always love, that's kind of classic, but there is always a part at the end of, I would say, at the end of book 4, beginning of book 5 of The Lord of the Rings, every single time I read it, there is always a split second when I go, oh my God, are they going to make it? Mm-hmm. And I mean, I've been reading this book for like 30 years, and it always happens. It's always like, And then I go, but silly you know they are going to make it. You know the story, you know it by heart, but there is always that moment of being so taken up by the story, being so drawn into it that you wonder, you're like, oh my God, are they going to make it? And so that's always something. And that's always something that gets me.
The situation at the end of the Two Towers is so dire. It's so awful for everybody. But isn't it wonderful that after so many years and so many times of reading it, that we still get drawn into it to that extent?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
It is. It is. That goes back to what I was saying earlier. I mean, after so many years, there are still so many layers to unpeel and say, okay, so how did he do it? What's in there? And you still find things, and that's really wonderful.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So those are the favorite bits of Tolkien's writing. But I said in my intro to you that you've had numerous experiences of actually working with people or meeting people around Tolkien as well. So do you have a favorite experience that is connected to your love of Tolkien?
So many, so many, that I'm going to have a hard time picking just one, because I really have, I have met so many wonderful people. I mean, you included, and all the wonderful peeps that, the group that we have in Leeds that we've been having for a couple of years now. Oh my gosh. Well, am I allowed to have two moments?
Go on, then. Only
oh, thank you so much. I'm going to go by the least important first, even if it's relative. Almost 10 years ago, back in 2012, there was a conference, a week-long conference held in Normandy about Tolkien. It was in a castle, and we were all sleeping in the castle. I mean, we were out of the world for an entire week, and having conferences on Tolkien all day long. And at the end of the week, we learned that the complete version of The Fall of Arthur was going to be published soon, and we had the extreme pleasure, under threat of non-disclosure, to have a reading of a chapter of The Fall of Arthur read by Adam Tolkien during the conference. And to that moment, like out of time, out of space, out of everything, was because we had no idea that book was going to be published soon. And so it was announced, and then bam, we had that reading, and we were just all like, oh, okay. And that was something really, really, really fantastic. But I think my favorite moments of all will remain the first time I saw The Fellowship of the Ring at the cinema, in theaters, back in 2001, because on that day I had been invited by my soon-to-be PhD supervisor. We had exchanged emails and letters so that he would accept me as a PhD student. But the only time we had met before that was several years ago under different circumstances. And so in November 2001, he sent me an email and said, I want you to come to Paris on that day, which was the day of the release. We will meet at 5 p.m. in a coffee shop, whatever, and we will discuss your PhD project and your future. And then we will go to see the movie. And so I went to Paris, and we had that long discussion about what I wanted to do, how I was seeing things. And then right when we had said, okay, well, I accepted your candidacy for a PhD on a whim a bit. I mean, he told me a couple of years ago that to this day, he still doesn't know why he accepted it, since he didn't know me as a student, practically didn't know me as a student before. And so he said, okay, well, we are going to do that. And then we got up and we went to see the movie at the first viewing for the Fellowship of the Rings. And we cried like stupids when Gandalf fell. And that was fantastic, because, I mean, that day, it was the day I started my PhD, and was the day I got to see that movie with that man who is a famous professor of medieval English in France. And when I first contacted him, I had no idea he would say yes. I mean, it was a bit of a crazy project. So that was one of the most important moments in my entire life, let alone in my Tolkien career.
What an absolutely wonderful moment to have. Just all of those things coming together on that day. How absolutely gorgeous a story is that? Oh, that's warms the cockles of my cold, dead heart.
Oh, dear.
Oh, that's lovely. Yeah, as you say, it's really hard to choose a moment, isn't it? Because we're so lucky. We have the opportunity, you and I, for many moments when there's no COVID.
Yeah.
But we have the opportunity for many moments. We're fingers crossed for Leeds next July.
Yeah, next year. Yep. Next summer.
Yeah. Okay, so next question. You've obviously been working with Tolkien as well as reading Tolkien for quite some time. So thinking more about your work with Tolkien, has your approach to Tolkien's work changed over time? Have you focused more on particular things in different periods of your life? Have those changed?
Obviously, when I was working on my PhD, I focused on all things Celtic, with air quotes about Celtic, because it's a trap word. But Celtic. No, please. So, of course, while I was focusing on that, I was looking for anything Welsh, Irish, or Breton in Tolkien's work. And I have to say, when I completed my PhD, for a time, I had enough. I mean, I said, okay, let's close the book on that one, because really, I don't want to see another Triskel or another, green bush or another druid or whatever for quite some times. And over the past couple of years, I've come back to my first research subject, the one I did for my master's dissertation, which was hobbits. And everything that has to do with hobbits, hobbits as characters, hobbits, the hobbit society, the hobbits in Middle Earth, hobbits as literary agents or literary tools. I really find them fascinating, and I've come back quite heavily in that domain. But the one thing that I have started to really investigate, that I had not really gone really far into before, is the whole the Lost Road and the Notion Club papers ideas. Of course, I had delved into the Lost Road ideas, because they are, in those pages, you find references to Celtic myth, you find references to Fintan, the first man, you find the references to Brandon and everything. But the whole science, what I call the science fiction-y aspect of Tolkien's writing, the whole theory about traveling through time, traveling through space, how to take your reader and bring him in a coherent and credible manner into another world or into another point in time. And I have started to go down that road, and it's really, really fascinating. And what it has taught me is when a book has been edited and brought to print by J.R.R. Tolkien, don't ever think that a word or a part of dialogue or an anecdote within the story is useless. Never, ever. Because I remember a couple of years ago in Leeds, I gave a paper on Mary's dream at the... I'm losing my word. After Tom Bombadil, when they are imprisoned, how is it called again?
Barrow Downs.
The Barrow Downs. Thank you, Sara. So I did a paper on Mary's dream at the Barrow Downs and how we get to have his weapon and whether or not it has an importance or a bearing regarding his later role in the story. And our dear friend Anna Small wrote a paper in similar ideas about Frodo for Birmingham 2019 on the dreams that Frodo has in Rivendell about Elendil and what bearings it has to his role further in the story. And I remember reading a paper by Verlyn Flieger about the Barrow Downs, when she says that to her the incident at the Barrow Downs is nonsensical or has no real importance in the story, and I went back to that and I say no, you can't say that because as it happens, it has a real importance. It is a trial run for Tolkien's ideas of how to travel through time, through dreams and memory transmission. And of course, in the story itself, it doesn't seem to make that much sense. But when you look at it closely, with the material we have from the history of Middle-earth, you find out that actually it makes a lot of sense, and it is a very important episode in Mary's character's development and in the events that are going to unfold before the story is over. So that is the one thing that I'm taking out of this. If you study parts of The Lord of the Rings, never ever assume that something is nonsensical or just anecdotic and that it's just thrown there for the sake of it. Because I dare say that 80% of the time you are going to find out it's not the case.
Fascinating stuff. And I can smell many future papers coming out of some of these ideas.
Maybe. Who knows?
Who knows? So to kind of bring this to a close then, I always like to ask people at the end of this, would you recommend Tolkien's work to people? I've had some really interesting answers to this in the past. Some people have said, well, of course, and some have actually said, no, I wouldn't recommend because I'd rather people actually read what they want to read. And other people saying, well, I would recommend it for people who are interested in whatever. But would you recommend Tolkien's writing to others?
Well, my answer is I would be hard-pressed to find someone to recommend it to, because all the people who know me have already, either tried it and hated it or tried it and found things that they liked. But yeah, I would say that I guess there is a Tolkien for everyone. And depending on people, I would indeed recommend different things. For example, I would not recommend the history of Middle-earth to someone who wouldn't be able to read Tolkien in English and then the history of Middle-earth in English, because it is so complex that I do not think, for that one, I do not think it is possible to translate without losing things. And if maybe I'm not gonna make myself many friends there, but if you study Tolkien, if you want to really go into it, do it in English, because really, even with the hardest work, even with there are some things that are going to get lost in translation. And with Tolkien, every word matters. Every single word matters. So that's one thing. But for those who say that they don't like fantasy, or they don't like, for example, my mother for a long time stayed away from Tolkien because she said, well, I don't like, there are monsters, there are, it's not in the real world, and I don't like that. And one day I gave her the Father Christmas letters. She was looking for Christmas text to read, because she's going to a retirement home to do some reading for elderly people, and she was looking for Christmas text. And I was like, okay, well, try this. And she loved it. She absolutely loved it. And she said, but I had no idea that that Tolkien could be that too. And I said, yeah, he really was jack of all trades when he came to writing. I also recommended her to read On Fairy Stories, which is to me one of the most important texts Tolkien ever wrote, and one of the most important texts you can read if you like fantasy, if you like stories in general. To me, it's a fantastic essay, and I love the monster and the critics, but you need to be familiar with Beowulf and Old English literature to really understand all the details about that. On Fairy Stories is you can understand it if you've ever liked a story, or you will be touched by that text, I think. And so, yeah, there is a Tolkien for everybody. But I don't know. Sometimes I also have the feeling that people won't feel like they should read Tolkien. Like, oh yeah, but it's it's in the air. It's been gaining popularity 20 years ago with the movies, and now with the upcoming series. But I guess that if you haven't naturally come to Tolkien, why should you? I don't know. For me, I often have people apologizing to me either for not reading it, or not liking it, or not going through saying, oh my gosh, Fellowship of the Ring is so boring at the beginning. All they do is walk. And I say, okay, that's fine. I love it. I work with it, but that's okay. It's me. I do enough. I spend enough time on Tolkien to make up for a lot of people not opening it. So don't worry. It's okay. You don't have to have Tolkien to love Tolkien because we're friends. That's fine with me. You don't have to. And I often find that people feel like they have to, which is a pity. But if they really have to, they can find something they will like. I'm sure of it.
Thank you, Aurélie. It's been really interesting having your perspective, because your perspective is unique to what I've done with Tolkien Experience podcast, in that you're the first person who is a translator of Tolkien that I've chatted to, and I find that really interesting because you will see Tolkien from different perspectives to the one that I see him from, and it's lovely to have that sense, your sense of Tolkien out there for people to hear. So thank you very much for sharing that with us today.
Oh, you're most welcome.
And thank you for coming on Tolkien Experience podcast. It's been absolutely lovely to have you.
That was a pleasure as well. Until we can meet again in real, that we'll have to do. But that was really lovely. Thank you for inviting me.
We are so thankful that we have such gracious scholars and fans who want to share their Tolkien experience with us and with you.
We really enjoy making these podcasts, and the fun doesn't stop here.
That's right, it continues on social media. You can find us on Facebook as Tolkien Experience and Twitter as @TolkienEXP. Don't forget to like, follow, share and comment because we love interacting with you just as much as we enjoy talking to our guests.
For even more content and to join our fellowship of supporters, check out our Patreon by going to patreon.com/TolkienExperience. Finally, you can also follow our personal Twitter accounts. I'm @LukeB.Shelton.
I'm @SR.Westvic.
And I'm @AaronL.Palmadill. If you have questions or comments, you can send them to us by email at tolkienexperience@gmail.com.
If you want to know more about this week's guest, we provide show notes at tolkienexperience.com. You can find the podcast on all major podcast services, including Apple, Stitcher, and YouTube. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast wherever you listen to it.
Thank you for listening to our podcast, and we truly hope that, in a way, it contributes to your own Tolkien experience.